All right, welcome back. This to the next video or the next lesson on the age of absolutism. In this one, we're going to be covering three countries: Austria, Prussia, and Russia. Now, there's not as much to talk about here, at least for a United States modern world civ class. Again, if there's anybody here watching this from Austria or Russia or Germany, Prussia leads the charge into becoming the greater Germany today. I sincerely apologize. This is just a drop in the bucket for this. But you do, as far as an American classroom, here's basically the basics you get from a high school course here. So I can cover this fairly quickly. So again, this is going to be on Austria, Prussia, and Russia. Now, there's a lot of monarchs we're talking about. And again, I said this in the last lesson, but again, I'll say this for this lesson. There is so many stories I'm skipping over, so many stories I don't even know myself that are just fascinating. And I'm trying to keep this as short and as sweet as possible, so I apologize up front there again. But getting into Austria, we're just going to be covering one leader from Austria. Famous and very looked up to for a lot of different reasons. Doesn't mean she's a perfect person, but Maria Theresa is one of those people that was, if you guys have been in my classes for a while, especially those who have had me a few times, I talk a lot about the underdog mentality. Even though she is the Empress of Austria, she has a huge underdog mentality to her, and what she does is quite impressive because of it. Simply put, what happens is this. She is like the only child of the emperor at the time, and I'm not remembering the emperor's name, probably should have written it in here, who could become the leader of Austria. The problem is that in Austria, they had this very more male-dominated idea that only men can be the emperors. Women are not supposed to get involved in that type of thing. They're supposed to be helping, kind of behind-the-scenes type stuff. They're not supposed to be the ones there up front making decisions. Problem is, though, is that there were a couple of her cousins that felt like they had equal claim to the throne, and it was pretty much a fact that there was going to be a massive civil war taking place if it came down to those cousins. So the emperor, realizing that Austria was not in a position to deal with that, they had too many enemies around them. France was really chomping at the bit to get more Austrian lands. Russia would love to see Austria go down. The northern German states, Prussia especially, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, would love to see the downfall of Austria and just want to pick up whatever pieces they could of the fallen empire. The current emperor of Austria didn't want to see this, so he issued what's called the Pragmatic Sanction, saying, usually we don't let women take charge, but in this one time we're going to let my daughter take charge. So he issues this decree and says, my daughter Maria Theresa will take charge. Now, this didn't face much opposition, not because everybody's like, oh yeah, she'll be a great leader. It didn't face much opposition because people were thinking, she's young, she's a girl, she's probably a little bit dumb. We can take advantage of her. If we can be the ones that control the strings on her as a puppet, then we'll be the ones that have control. Even the cousins that were vying for power of the throne were thinking that way too. It's like, oh, we don't even have to do a war. All we have to do is gain her favor or control her without her realizing it. And she turns that around on all of them. Again, I'm not going to go into this too in depth, but she turns out to be an incredibly strong, headstrong woman, but strong, strong-willed girl, and later on a woman in her life, to where she doesn't just keep Austria together, but she gets them through two major wars. To this day, she's seen as just this great icon of someone who's able to kind of just stand up and do what needs to be done. Definitely a feminist icon today. And yeah, if you read her story, it's not like she does everything great, but she is quite impressive. If you look at it from her point of view, if you don't look at it from her point of view, you can see her as being a little bit dastardly, but she does what needs to get done. In a way, she is like that sanction that her father decreed. She's very pragmatic. If you don't know what pragmatic means, it's the idea of it might not be the ideal situation, but this is what needs to happen. This is the realistic situation in order for things to be as best as they can be in a realistic world. So, but that's the case behind Maria Theresa, and I'll actually talk a little bit more about her when we in the very last segment, lesson when we talk about the wars of absolutism, because those two wars she's in, we'll be talking about a bit. So, anyways, there's a bit of Maria Theresa for you. If you want to look up more on her, please do. Now, the main enemy of Maria Theresa, she has a lot of enemies, like European enemies. Her main one, though, is Frederick II, also known as Frederick the Great, of Prussia. Now, if you do not know what Prussia is, please do not confuse this with saying like Russia or Austria. Like, they all rhyme. Russia, Prussia, Austria, they all rhyme. Prussia isn't around okay, if you're Prussian, you might take it. You might not like this, but Prussia isn't around anymore necessarily as like a major political state, because later on Prussia becomes Germany. So in a way, when we're talking about Prussia right now, think of Germany. These are the Germans. But Germany at this time, there's no Germany. It's what's called the Holy Roman Empire, and it's broken up into a lot of different princedoms. One of the most powerful princedom is the Kingdom of Prussia. So, and Frederick the Great is one of those guys that actually leads Prussia from being just, a major German kingdom into actually a European power, a country, a princedom that could even stand up to the likes of France or Russia or Austria or England. So, now, how were they able to do this? Well, an incredibly well-trained and disciplined army. And then it didn't hurt too much to have Frederick the Great being considered one of the greatest military geniuses of all time. He's up there with the Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte, who actually comes a bit after him in the latter half of this century of the 1700s and early 1800s. Anyways, he's just considered one of the great military minds. He's one of those guys you actually, if you're going to go into military history, if you're going to go into military tactics, warfare yourself, this is one of those guys you actually study at a military university. So, anyways, now just a little bit to go on here. If you think about, how do I put this? Germany today is known to be very kind of OCD. Things need to be this way, get things done, a good work ethic and all like that. And a lot of that can be attributed to this idea of just kind of this military lifestyle they've had for a long time. They had it even before this, by the way, before Frederick the Great. He just more fine-tuned it. But when you go into the armies, the German armies of World War I and World War II, it's this kind of this cultural heritage thing of just military families. Is a big deal. It wouldn't be as much today, but just it's still around a little bit. Anyways, that's most I'll talk about it on that side to kind of connect the past and the present a bit. But if you're looking at the bottom, he picks on Maria Theresa a lot. He is one of those guys who's like, hey, she looks like someone I can take advantage of. Meaning the idea that I can take bits of her kingdom away and she won't be able to stop me. I'm not going to talk about that right now. I will talk about that in the Wars of Absolutism. But just definitely introducing this guy as one of the great absolute rulers. Now, if I really wanted to go into that, I could go into this more. I could talk about his dad, who's known as the Great Elector, also called Frederick, by the way. And then the people that followed him. But again, just simply put, this is one of those guys you do need to know about in history. Most people know who Frederick the Great is. And again, I'll talk more about his exploits and his military victories later on in the next segment. Now, I am going to be getting into these guys a bit more, the Russians. There's going to be 3 of them. First one is a guy named Ivan, also known as Ivan the Terrible. Okay. So, if you look at that painting there, I can't say this. Like I'm saying, this is kind of just a funny thing. But I imagine he looked at that painting and was like, yeah, that's definitely me. We look at that painting today and we're just like, yeah, this guy looks like a crazy dude. So, simply put, Ivan, along with his dad, did a lot to extricate Russia from Mongol rule. Just know the Mongol Empire is this empire that were in control of pretty much all of Asia for hundreds of years, including the area of Russia. They'd subdued it many times. But under Ivan and Ivan's dad and Ivan, they actually were able to kind of get Russia finally outside of the grasp of the Mongols, Mongol domination. And this is where you see the start of the Kingdom of Russia, what is known as Russia today. Yes, it is around beforehand, but this is considered the beginning, as like an independent kingdom type thing that's still around at this point. You know, they've gone through many changes, like Soviet Union and stuff like that. But anyways, I'm digressing again. So he's a guy that seeks for absolute rule. You know, he doesn't want to just work with the nobles. He wants to control everybody. And he does a pretty good job of it. Now, it says there that he weakens the power of the nobility, confiscates their land and stuff like that. But he does even more. And I'll just give you some of the stories here that lead into this idea of like why he's considered Ivan the Terrible. For one of the more famous stories is there was a noble who really just was getting on his nerves. I can't remember what he did necessarily, but just, you know, criticizing and challenging Ivan way too much. And so Ivan just had enough of it, ordered that a bear pelt be taken down off the wall of the palace, that this noble needed to be sewed up into it. Then he tells the noble he has a 1-hour head start, and then he sends the dogs after him and he hunts him down. Yes, and he does kill him, like it was a bear hunt. You know, it's like there's a bunch of things he does like that to where it just kind of cows nobility into submission. And I just, again, I'm trying not to make this too long, but another story I'll tell, one of those things why he's seen such a terrible person is, after his wife died, he definitely went into more of an insane mood. His wife was a named Anastasia, and she was known to be able to kind of calm him a bit. He actually seemed a little bit more sane in his early years of reigning over Russia as the Tsar of Russia. By the way, Tsar, the title of someone who leads there. If you want to know a little bit more of the history of Tsar, it's the Russian term for Caesar. It's essentially saying like I am the new Roman emperor of Russia. So anyways, if that makes sense to you. Anyways, so Tsar Ivan was seen as a little bit more sane when he has his wife to kind of calm him down a little bit. But she passes away. And there's just no check on his insanity, you could say. So even with the rest of his family, for instance, his son gets married, you know, a marriage that Ivan condoned. But when he saw his daughter-in-law wearing a dress that he just thought was a little bit too immodest, he beats her right in the middle of the hallway of the palace. And she was pregnant at the time and causes her to have a miscarriage right there on the floor. And he doesn't have a second thought about it. Of course, his son is really ticked off. So his son that night comes and confronts him about it, saying, you know, look what you did to my wife, look what you did to our son, look what you did to your grandson. And they get into a fight. And Ivan clubs his own son to death at that point. There's differing things in the idea of like, did he feel remorse or not? But that's the whole idea. We're arguing about, did he feel remorse or not about murdering his own son? And but for the rest of his life, he doesn't really go back. It doesn't seem like he mourns his own son that much. Anyways, I can go into more stories, but there's a few of them for you. You can look up more if you'd like to. There's definitely more. So, but he is seen as the first guy to kind of just get this more absolutist rule idea into Russia. Okay, not directly after Ivan, but later down the line of rulers, you get to a guy named Peter the Great. So, and aptly named Peter the Great. He's the guy that kind of takes Russia from kind of this backwoods, just behind the times area to being more modern. He actually goes and lives at Versailles. We talked about that in the last video segment about France, but he actually lives in Versailles, and he's smart enough to realize what Louis is doing. He's like, wow, this is how Louis is keeping control of everybody. I'm going to do the same thing over in Russia. So when he gets back to Russia, he actually builds, this is where he builds the city of St. Petersburg, and St. Petersburg is meant to be a Versailles for the Russian nobility, a way to keep them there and keep his eye on them, keep control of them, where he can reign with more absolute power. He also forces them to become westernized, doing things like, hey, you have to cut your beards off. I mean, a beard at the time, like these big, long, flowing beards, was a sign of just like, I don't know how to put this, masculinity, power, prestige, tenure, I don't know, but whatever idea of like I'm better than you type thing, or I've earned this type thing. And he's like, no, people in France and England and Spain, they're shaving, and that's the way you're supposed to do things. Notice the picture of him there where he doesn't have a beard either. You know, just a nicely upkept mustache is the way to go. So he even like cuts their mustache off, or beards off. They didn't take too kindly to it, but they kind of had to go along with it. By the way, I should have had that up earlier. But yeah, he wanted to copy Louis XIV. He wanted to become as powerful as Louis XIV and do so from a Russian point of view. And this westernization that he has, that he forces upon Russia, well, from a historical point of view, look back then, it says, yes, Peter the Great is the beginning point of Russia becoming more part of the world around them and not just this backwards area. Anyways. So last person we're going to talk about is Catherine the Great of Russia. Now, she actually is the ruler of Russia fairly soon after Peter the Great, but not right after. There were actually 2 czars in between her and Peter. Now, I'm just going to put all this up here for you so you can get it down. The way she comes to power is a little bit on the idea of the questionable side. I'm only saying questionable because there's no real official, you can't really say this was bad, but it's just, when you look at it from a historical point of view, it's suspect. Basically, Peter dies, and the next in line, again, I don't remember the names right now, but the guy next in line for the throne comes in, and he's in power for a short time, dies, and I was like, I should have looked this up. Either dies like in a hunting accident or dies of being sickly, and we talked about that a bit in our segment on England, were they really sick or not. Her husband then was actually the next in line for the throne, and he dies right after the birth of their child. He was only czar for a few months, and he dies of basically drinking too much. He was a drunkard his whole life. Now, that could have been the cause of death, but it is suspect, the idea that he died just a month after their birth. Now, a little bit more information to know here is she is not Russian. She is actually German. She belongs to a small German princedom, not Prussia, but a small German princedom, looking for kind of more power, you could say, and they were able to get her to get married to this guy who was third in line, essentially, or second or third in line to the throne of Russia. It's like, hey, great, we can do this. So a German, an ethnic German, becomes leader of Russia. Now, she is very much into Russia. This isn't something where she tries to overthrow Russia or cede it over to a German kingdom or something like that. She is seen as a great Russian leader. She really pushes it forward. Although she does bring in a lot of Germans to settle Russian lands. She actually invites a lot of German settlers to come over to Russia. And a lot of those Germans were there, even all the way up into still today, actually. Families have been in these areas that brought it over, but there was actually a lot of problem there between these Germans that were in Russia and the Russians themselves come World War II, when you have the Great War between Germany and Russia, Stalin versus Hitler and stuff like that. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but there's a little bit of a connection for you. Anyways, if you're looking at the things that she does, she really, if Peter the Great is seen as the one who modernizes or westernizes Russia, Catherine the Great is the one that's seen that really brings Russia into a sense of prominent power as an equal player with countries like Austria or France or England, and definitely with Spain, who was still quite powerful, or who was waning at this time, but still quite powerful. She's the one that actually gets Siberia and makes Russia look like the way it does today, just this massive country that spans over all of northern Asia. Northern Eurasia, I should say. So, and she's also seen as a very, how do I put this? Forgiving. Is forgiving the right word? Benevolent. She's seen as a very benevolent ruler. Like at the bottom there, it talks about gain loyalty of landowning elites by getting them autonomy. It's the idea that, she let them do what they wanted to, but at the same time she required their loyalty, and they were willing to give it because she was allowing to do things that they just didn't have power of before. Things where they'd get killed over if Ivan was in charge and stuff like that. Anyways, more stories I can go into here, but she is also involved in the wars of absolutism, and I'll talk about her more in the next segment. So there's Catherine the Great for you. And that's going to end this segment. So we have covered the rulers of Austria, Prussia, and Russia. Again, a heck of a lot more goes in there. This is just brushing over it, giving you some insight or a little bit of info on the rulers of these areas at this time. Anyways, I'll see you in the next segment, which will be the last segment for this unit on the age of I can't speak right now. The age of absolutism.